the best geopolitical questions don't come from analysts, they come from you. This is our Mailbag episode. Welcome back to Geopolitical Cousins. I am your editor, Jacob. Today, we're opening the inbox, taking your questions on the markets, on Jacob and Marco's media consumption, the potential for a new cousin, and like 500 billion requests for a hot take on your particular home country. Spoiler, we don't get to all the countries. We tried our best to hit the ones that covered the most ground or were perhaps the most thought-provoking or something along those lines. I honestly don't know how Jacob filtered these, so take it up with him. If you've ever wondered how Jacob and Marco think through uncertainty in real time, this is the episode. Let's get into it.
All right, listeners, we say we don't normally prepare for podcasts, but neither one of us really prepared for this. Although, like, we solicited your mailbag questions, I organized them, I've read them. Like, you know, we've done a good job.
I just want to correct Jacob there. I did nothing, and I want to say why I did nothing. I couldn't open the file he sent. That's the frustration. So basically, I'm number one, a boomer, number two, a Luddite, and so I could not open the Word file that Jacob sent me. And so I'm going into this completely and utterly unprepared, cold, and it's okay. Sometimes LeBron doesn't stretch.
Well, and it's a mailbag. Actually, our authentic reactions to this are what people are really after. Some listeners were nice enough to include their names and some of their background. I'm not going to read that stuff on air. We need to think more seriously about what we disclose, and maybe if people give us permission to disclose, but I'm going to err on the side of privacy. So I'm not going to mention names, and if there's any identifying information, I'm going to scrub it right now, because it's nice that you want to share it with us, but I don't know that you want to share it with the thousands of people who are listening to this episode
also,
right now.
In the future, I would just say, when you send us a question for this segment, tell us where you're from, or at least where you're sending, because that would be cool. It would be cool to say a reader from Finland.
That's true. That's true.
That'd be kind of cool.
That would also help.
Not everybody did that.
A lot of this is I care about y'all's privacy. Also, about 10% of you, there's no way I can pronounce your names. So
nice.
This is a good way to get around it. First of all, one of the best emails that we got was not actually a question; it was a comment. It was a comment on the one about Mark Carney, that it was a super podcast. Thank you very much. But he said that he caught the Wire reference in there from yours truly about, Omar with the shotgun and the lawyer with the briefcase. And he wanted to share the one that he thought of when he heard Carney's speech, which is also his favorite quote of all time as a self-taught realist living in an often idealistic world. It's Marlowe telling a security guard who follows the rules how the world actually works.
Look, I told you I wasn't stepping two. I ain't disrespecting you, son.
You want it to be one way.
What?
You want it to be one way.
Man, I don't
want
know
it to be one
Man,
way.
stop! Stop saying that.
But it's the other way.
Anything you want to add to that beautiful recommendation, cousin?
That was probably the best reaction. And by the way, it is the CIO of a major bank. That's all I'm going to say. CIO of a major bank out there knows the Wire by heart. And I just want to say, it's too bad I can't say who it is, because I would put all my money in this bank. If, once you realize, oh my God, this guy gets it, gets the joke. Well done, sir. You are a hero. He already knows that he's our hero. But anyways, CIO of a major bank out there sent us a clip of the Wire. I mean, can't get better than that.
Not just a clip of the Wire, but Marlowe with the lollipop in his mouth going, you want it the one way, but it's the other way. It's really... Marlowe is maybe... he's up there top 5 most despicable characters I've ever seen on a television in my lifetime. They really nailed that character.
I think they nailed the first season. But actually, I like all seasons of The Wire, but I think the first season just had... so many just incredible characters.
No, I like the whole Wire too. I think some people, get finicky about different seasons. The first season hit so hard because there really was nothing like it on television at the time. We had done some crime procedurals and things like that, but The Wire was something else. It went deeper. It was gritty. It was real. If you've ever been in Baltimore, you know it's real. I've been unfortunate enough to spend some time in Baltimore and less savory parts of Baltimore. I mean, it slaps. Like it really nailed it. So that's a great way to start. And by the way, to that listener and others, there will be more Wire references, as you can tell. Like we're just getting started here. We at some point we're going to do the Barksdale Stringer rivalry and superimpose that on geopolitics, but not today. On to our first question. I'm going to group a couple of these in part because, cousin, I don't know if you know this, but the numbers on our Process podcast about bias and how we're thinking about things have been doing really well. People have been replying. We love these. We love thinking about how you're thinking. I mean, people also love our takes for the most part. But there were a lot of process-oriented questions, and I want to start with some of those before we get into some of the content ones. So this gentleman, I believe it's a gentleman, writes that as someone who split his life between DC, New York, and the former Soviet Union, I love the vibes between you and Marco. It feels like the combined voice that emerges is a blend between the brilliant and slightly contrarian DC analyst type and the wily Slavic uncle who will pull you aside as a teenager after dinner to tell you how the world really works. Thank you for that. His question: what routines have you two developed for media consumption, and how do you maintain a good information diet for analysis, i.e. keep the dumb stuff out of your head and fill your head with quality info? You have at times called out outlets like The Economist and New York Times. I would love to hear the sources you both turn to daily for news, as well as any methods you have for processing deeper knowledge on any particular topic as you get up to speed. Also interested in a more fully articulated critique you have of the mainstream outlets below. This gentleman also has a bonus question, and I think it's very apropos. He says, although he is a liberal, firm believer in Trump derangement syndrome, he wants to hear our take on something that he's started to notice, which he calls Trump derangement syndrome derangement syndrome. This is when an ordinarily reasonable person starts to defend, or both sides, an objectively bad Trump phenomenon just because the more vocally deranged liberals are being especially obnoxious about it, real or imagined. Give me your hottest take. Cousin, I will let you cook first.
Well, first of all, I clearly have that.
Yes, you do, which is why I started with that one.
I'm definitely guilty of having the Trump derangement syndrome. Well done, sir. TDS derangement syndrome. That's what I have. Yes, I just can't stand it anymore. I just can't, I clearly have that. And when people just get a rash because Trump spoke on TV, I get a rash because they got a rash, clearly. So I need an aloe vera for that. So well done, sir. Well done. And I like how he didn't accuse me of it, but he just threw it in there.
Bonus question.
And by the way, this is how you know I'm not biased. I'm making fun of myself. Okay, so let's talk about sources. Look, I don't know what you do, Jacob, but what I do is I only try to watch The Wires. Another reference to The Wire. So I love the Reuters. I love Reuters. Reuters is collapsing in the stock market.
Yes,
you know what I mean? It's just falling off a cliff. I actually pay for Reuters.
Oh, you pay? Wow. Nice.
I actually go out and straight up pay. Reuters, Bloomberg, MarketWatch. Why? I know what the bias of those is. I know it's financial markets. So and that's what I do for a living anyways. I advise investors on how to navigate politics and geopolitics. So I just stick to financial journalism because I feel that the bias of financial journalism is inherent. It's how do we all make money? And I'm okay with that. That's good. I would rather light myself on fire than use the New York Times and The Economist as my sources of information. I got to tell you that right now. Probably not going to be interviewed anymore by either one of those, and somehow I will survive. So yeah, I honestly would rather just put a hose of Fox News right into my mouth than read New York Times. That's how much I can't stand it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, first of all, on the Trump derangement syndrome, I don't have it as bad as you. I do have it, although I've been lately shedding that skin a little bit. And I've been shedding that skin by, I think one of the pitfalls of geopolitical analysis is we always tend to
imbue rationality.
Yeah, imbue rationality. And sometimes people are just wrong, or they're not thinking the way that you're thinking. And I think this is particularly apt with President Trump because, as I've said before, I think he's a brilliant tactician in some ways, but I don't think he's a strategic thinker. And so, for instance, I had a Polish client ask me this week, can you explain, give me the strategic rationale behind the tariffs? And I said to that client, look, like, I can tell you that it's about responding to deglobalization and reshoring industrial policy and everything else. But at this point, does it really matter what the strategic goal is? Because the tactical execution has been so all over the place that this isn't strategy anymore. This is literally just.
And let me cook.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just cook on this right now and come back to it. Don't forget what you wanted to say and conclude. But like, tariffs are a great example because they may have been about X, but now they're about Y. What's Y? Well, Y right now is like, yo, they bring $3 trillion worth of revenue. Like, that's what they're about. Were they about that on April 2nd when he held out the billboard that showed that we were going to tariff penguins? No. And that's kind of the thing that I've described before. I don't think you can't really assign preferences to President Trump. You just got to kind of figure out where he lands based on the constraints he encounters. It's like a guy who walks into a bar and says, I'm going to go home with a date tonight. And then he proceeds to ask every single woman at the bar for a date. Like, it's not like he, you know what I mean? He didn't really walk in there saying like, I like X or Y. Or Z.
I would just make it even sharper. Like, think about Greenland. Like, he threatened Europe with Greenland tariffs. There was no strategic plan there. Greenland was like a total non sequitur to everything. And the threat of increased tariffs on European countries was a non sequitur to the non sequitur. There is no strategic rationale behind that decision. It is a guy who is understanding he has, like, it's leverage every time he threatens a tariff. And if you're a European country and you're dependent on the US for trade or security or everything else, you have to listen to it. But there's no grand strategic logic behind that. It's just a guy who's like figuring out leverage and trying to get something going in an argument. And by the way, Trump is not unique in this. He just happens to be particularly like less strategic and more tactical than some of his predecessors.
So if I can follow that revelation with a great example of how I do have a TDS derangement syndrome.
Yeah, great.
God bless him for that. It's about time that we have a policymaker. So here, you see how this is TDS derangement syndrome?
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah.
You see? So like, you know what? I prefer that we have a president who walks into a bar and doesn't know who he wants to go home with, rather than someone who's ideologically committed to a certain type. Or one that's actually stumbling in the dark, but then when they make a choice, they imbue it with ideological defense. Why? Because then we're stuck with that. So like, you've got a guy who's just fumbling in the dark. Hey, at least I think he kind of knows that, which is why Trump is the first president that kind of does do a 180 quite dramatically on stuff that most presidents would not do a 180 on. Like, he campaigned on immigration. He put some like pretty harsh people in charge of it. And then he's like, nah, I don't like all this killing. You guys are fired. I mean, soon to be. You see what I'm getting at? Like, in a way, that lack of logic or lack of conviction can also lead to at least 180-degree turns. It's like traders. Like, one of the most frustrating things about working with traders, like not investors, but people who trade actively, is that they will change their mind all the time. I have a dear friend of mine. I can't say his name because he's like kind of famous, but I think he's the best market timer on the planet. And he'll come to me and he'll be like, I'm short S&P 500 because of these three reasons. And you're like, wow, that's profound, bro. You convinced me. Then 2 weeks later, you're like, hey man, how's it going? He's like, oh man, I made a killing. I went long stocks. And you're like, but you told me you were short 3. He's like, no. Here's 3 other reasons. And you're like, that's bullshit. Your narrative was so good 3 weeks ago. Now you have a different view. The truth is, the man doesn't know why he changed his mind. He actually has an incredible perception of the markets, and his gut is so powerful. It's like unbelievable. And it's actually when he tries to explain it with logic and narrative that he sounds like an idiot. The truth is, he's just got a good gut. And it's like, hey, you know what? That's good enough for me. You got a good gut. Just go with your gut. And so that's what I'm saying. I think sometimes it's okay not to have a grand vision and to just be stumbling in the dark, figuring out who you're going to go home with. I don't know. I'm mixing a lot of metaphors, but
you are. It's that wily Slavic uncle is coming out in you. And I would just say, I'd like my president to be ideologically committed to not going home with someone with an STD or who is going to be a gold digger and honey trap me. Like if we just have some basic standards here. And also, I think you're right. You don't he gets in trouble when he has to explain it. He also gets in trouble when he has to convince a majority of democratically elected lawmakers, even in his own party, to go along with it, which is like sort of the game in democracy. Like this is not Turkmenistan, although with the gold statues that are going up all the time, we're getting closer and closer to Gurbanguly. All he has to do is take out the mixed table and we're going to be on our way, you know?
But wait a minute. At the same time, they do increasingly revolt against him. We've quoted Tom Tillis on this podcast many times. Man, that man is like on my YouTube algorithm. This is Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Holy shit, he's just unrestrained, on fire. Let's go. But anyways,
he's taking shots at President Trump. I will say the main focus of his ire is Stephen Miller, and I'm here for all of it. And I just, in case Senator Tillis or anyone on the Tillis staff is listening, if you need some foreign policy advice for a presidential run, I will do it for you pro bono. I'm in. I like your style. I like what you're doing. Like I will give you some pro bono advice if you want. Before we leave this question, Marco, I kind of covered it already, so I'll just say two things. First of all, I think you're taking shots at the gray lady, the New York Times. I certainly don't read the New York Times cover to cover, but there are certain journalists who still report in the New York Times who are good. Like there are one or two China reporters for the New York Times who, when they write something, I read it. I don't read everything, and you have to be a little bit picky and choosy, and you have to start establishing report cards and scorecards for, okay, well, this journalist said this, and this is what they backed it up with, or this one was crazy and has an ideological stone to grind or something like that. But I would say it doesn't really matter what outlets you read. You can read whatever you want, as long as, first of all, you have that sense of bias. But second of all, the most important thing I do when I'm reading and looking for information is find the original. Because about 80% of what gets published out there is a story about some report that was published, or some government statistic, or some politician gave an interview, or like something actually happened on the ground somewhere. And the real trick for me reading news is get to the original source, because about 85 to 90% of the time, the New York Times article you're reading is about 3 or 4 derivations away from what the original story was. So I want, like, if there's an IMF study that creates a Reuters report and a Bloomberg report and a New York Times report, go to the IMF report. Read the IMF report. Read it yourself. Figure out what it says to yourself, not what the journalist who had a deadline to make and needed to put an article in, like, gave you what the headline was for. Like, that's actually what most articles are. It's why the hardest time, I think, to read news is when things are happening like the UN General Assembly. Because for 2 weeks, you're going to get nothing but vapid, completely empty stories that are sourced from stupid meetings and stupid statements at the UN General Assembly, which matters not at all. Like, not even a little bit does that matter in any sort of real geopolitical way. So for those 2 weeks, I don't even read it, because I know that I'm not going to find anything, and I'm out there looking at other things or doing deep research. So I don't care. Read The Economist, read Fox News, read Turkmenistan Times. Just when somebody's citing something, find the original source of the thing that they are reporting on. It's that simple, and it's that hard at the same time. And if you're going to use as your excuse, but I only speak English, guys, it's the year of our Lord 2026. Google Translate is incredible. Just get the plugin, do the right click. You'll get 80% of the way there, and you're already smarter than 99% of people doing it. And you're not a cheater doing that. Like, you're actually really smart. And anybody who looks down on you for doing that sucks and is trying to gatekeep their expertise, which is rapidly evaporating in a world where soon we will have a Star Trek universal translator. There's your hot take.
No, I mean, that's great. And that's also what I tell my clients and what I do as well, especially speeches. Like, if Mark Carney makes a speech in Davos, journalists just want to fill the narratives that sell, that click. So they're going to go and find the parts of that speech where he said something negative about Trump. And they'll miss the whole point of the speech, which was actually I need to act more like Trump, so you guys need to stop criticizing me, because we're in a world of Machiavellian power. So that's exactly what you're saying, Jacob. Like, the journalist will just pick and choose the quotes from an original source that fit some sort of a narrative that's easy to slap together and write. Oftentimes, they pre-wrote the speech, their story. I would also say Jacob is correct. Like, you can read anything you want, just know what the source of the bias is. And also, like, try to diversify your like, so if you're conservative and you get all of your news, I don't know, from Fox, like, skim the headlines at least. Maybe one of them will suck you in. Maybe you'll read something interesting from a more centrist or liberal publication. And so that's another one that I would say is useful. But yeah, I don't think you and I have. This is a key. This is the key. This is both going to be disappointing to our listeners, and it should actually be very optimistic for them. We don't have a special Substack we read. We have the same news you do. We just understand on some level it's all bullshit, and it's your job to figure out that that's, or as my dad used to say, it's all Hollywood. You know, once you get that, and he's the OG Slavic uncle, right? I would be like, Daddy, Daddy, what's going on in the world? He would take a drag of his cigarette and say, it's all Hollywood. You know, and that's it. Like, that's it. Once you get that, then you can read whatever the fuck you want.
Which is a great segue. This is a very, very similar question, but I think it actually allows us to cook on that next part of it. So away from the source, but also sort of the other analysts that are out there. This gentleman writes, well, he says some nice things about us. Thank you very much. How do you decide what to read to or listen to in the first place? But then the part of this question that is different from the one previously is you mentioned that you avoid other people's takes so that they don't cloud your thinking. But from the outside, it's hard to know how to separate information from interpretation. In my own journey, I'll often find someone interesting for a while, but eventually drift away once I start noticing patterns like hyperbole, moralizing, clear incentives, or outright propaganda. So, what do you treat as a raw input versus a take? Who, if anyone, do you still read or listen to regularly? And then how do you discipline yourselves against retroactively defending a thesis by shifting time horizons or frames? Um, do you want to take this one, Cuz? Or I can answer this one first if you want to take a second to think.
No, go ahead.
Well, the last one is the easiest one to answer. The way that Marco and I do this, I'll presume to speak for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, cousin. Is we work in finance, we work in markets. So the markets have a very, very clear feedback mechanism for me. The first 10 years of my career, this was actually incredibly difficult for me because a lot of my work was qualitative, and I had a really hard time defining what success looked like, even if I did a good job at laying out scenarios. It's why I've really enjoyed working in finance, because ultimately your time horizon, your frame is, did this work from a market based perspective? And I really enjoy that feedback back loop. In terms of like who I still read or listen to regularly, if you're drifting in and out of any personality, good, you should be. I often tell clients, and when I speak to audiences, if you agree with 100% of what I say, great. And if you're only listening to me, like I'm not actually doing the job correctly. You need to diversify your sources. So there are some very specific area experts that I will follow because I find that their expertise is valuable. Like I subscribe to Bill Bishop's Cynicism. I subscribe to Tobias Harris's Japan Substack. I really like Kaiser Kuo and the Seneca podcast. Has some really good thinking on China. So I have some thinkers that I will check in regularly with. I really like David McWilliams. He's that Irish central banker who kind of called the 2008 financial crisis. Sometimes what he says is ludicrous, but I at least like knowing like what he's saying, and I'll keep track of it. So there's like a roster of people that I will check in on regularly. But yeah, sometimes like even the best analyst is going to be unhinged about some things, or is going to be having a rough month because of something in their personal life and the work is not as good, or isn't going to have as good access to information as they usually do. So you have to, like, nobody's perfect and you have to allow for that. And as for raw input versus a take, I really try not to read takes, even Marco's, even Bill Bishop's. Like I'm really there for, oh, they're gathering or translating information that I can't really get access to, and they have a framework or a perspective on it, and I try and slot that into my own thinking. It's why, like, one of the most frustrating questions that I get, and this is not a shot at you, cousin, like, well, Marco said this, what do you think about it? Or Peter said this, what do you think about it? And the honest answer is, I have no clue. It takes a lot of discipline to not read them. And A, I don't want to criticize them. And B, I honestly haven't read them closely, because if I read them closely, I'd probably like agree with them, or it would affect me in some meaningful way.
Yeah, I think that's why this listener should not just stress over this. You're a consumer of information. We're producers, or analysis, if you will. So don't stress. Like Jacob and I have to produce takes. and we're very committed to being honest, and like we're professionals at our craft. We don't want to be contaminated by other people's takes. My clients pay me for my view, like not somebody else's view. And that's why we don't have a good answer for who do we read or whatever. You, on the other hand, like you have a day job, like you might be a radiologist. Okay. Like all day you go in and you look at like x-rays of people's like diseases. You do that 10 hours a day. You don't have time to then produce your own take. You should consume other people's takes. And that's why you were listening to our podcast. But although I do find it curious that particular listener said that they often get turned off by hyperbole. Like, has he been listening to me?
Well, that's the secret sauce of the podcast, though. Like you and I are good foils for each other, because when you're getting hyperbolic, I could bring you back to earth, and when I'm getting caught in my Trump derangement syndrome and arguing with myself, you're like, "Yo, bro, like this is the way that it is. You need to
But you know
stop
what?
talking to."
But you know what I will say, Jacob? The hyperbole is really useful, and I'll tell you why. Like, markets, like when you have a take that's pretty much in the price, people say, "Oh, Marco, you're a contrarian." I'm not. I'm just not going to tell you the shit that's already in the price. In the price is just a term that someone in finance would say, like, "Oh, like everybody knows that." You know what I mean? Like,
No, I would
that's
take
why.
it one
By the
step
way,
further. Like hyperbole is super important, and if you're not capable of it as an analyst, you're not going to be good, because you have to be clear. Like hyperbole as a heuristic is great. Now, if you believe that, if you
yeah,
start drinking the
exactly.
Kool-Aid of your
No,
own
no,
hyperbole, that's fine. But
exactly.
often when you or I resort to hyperbole,
It's
yes, of
heuristical.
course it's nuanced for ourselves, but we have a limited window to capture your attention and explain it. And if we start doing that, but it's
But
this
let me
and it's
give
that.
let me give you
Please,
an example of what I'm talking about. Like everyone's like, "Yo, bro, like Trump, he's bringing back the Monroe Doctrine." I hate that. I hate that take. I hate it so much because it's like Monroe Doctrine never left. Like America was like, "Nah, bro, like we don't care about like Western Hemisphere. Like fuck it." No, that's that. He always cared about Western Hemisphere. He's always pissed off by like, drug cartels running around or like whatever. And like it always tried its best, but Cuba, even at the height of the Monroe Doctrine, the Cuba was like communist. So, like, pump the brakes on this being some sort of like a huge thing. So that's where I just don't want to talk about it because it's like obvious, right? So it's not that interesting to me. Sometimes what's on the cover of the New York Times or the Economist is in the price. And if clients ask me, like, do you think like AI is a big deal? I'm like, yeah, it's a big deal. Can we move on to some shit that you haven't heard? You can go pick up a copy of that for $7, like, or do you want to get some hot takes, right? And that's in a way why we're in this. That's why I think this podcast is interesting to people because they do get to hear something that's not on the cover of a newspaper. But it doesn't mean that we always poop on everything that's on the cover. It's just that
no.
we're not going to talk about it. It's like, yeah, you're right. Like that is the truth. Let's move on.
Yeah. All right, I've got two more questions in this sort of vein, and then we'll start shifting into some more content-focused things. This one is from a gentleman who works in business development for a public sector tech contractor, a dedicated listener. Oh, we're a staple of his routine. Thank you. We're happy to be a staple of your routine. He specifically appreciates how we focus on the reality of the international system as opposed to the normative claims that many governments and pundits cling to. His question involves the tension between professional realism and personal mission. He's wanted to dedicate his career to reducing human conflict and human suffering. However, he has found that many in the humanitarian or policy space hold overly idealistic views that can actually hinder effective outcomes. What specific advice would you give to someone trying to pursue a normative objective like reducing conflict while remaining strictly attuned to the hard realities of international relations? What advice would you give to a practitioner who wishes to be effective?
Wow, that's awesome. I love that question. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for submitting it. I would so first of all, you can read my entire book, Geopolitical Alpha, with a moralistic normative like lens. Just look, it goes back to The Wire, right? And Marlowe's like comment. It's like you got to be aware of how the world works, first and foremost. You got to dispel the notion that the world is a nice place or that it's operated on normative moral grounds. once you dispel it, once you actually imbue yourself with the realism and understand the power, then you can be what Jacob has often said are his favorite policymakers. Those that understand their constraints, they don't ignore them, they don't lie to themselves or surround themselves with sycophants that tell them that there's no constraints. They're aware of them, and then they start the tough job of overturning them. So in a way, I would say if you want to do good in the world, and if that is your goal, you kind of need to be like an alcoholic in that you got to understand you are an alcoholic. You have a problem. In your case, your problem is you just want to do good in the world. And I'm facetious, obviously. I don't mean that's a problem. It's awesome. You're superior than I am. But once you decide to do that, you got to understand that you have to recognize that you have a mental problem, which is that you're trying to fix the world that doesn't want to be fixed, that is immoral, that is driven by power and Machiavellian drives. And then you can actually change that world once you
Yeah.
understand those factors. And that's why a lot of realists in political science will often accuse their liberal colleagues in academia as actually not actually being helpful to make the world a better place. To make the world a better place, you first have to start with the view that it's actually a nasty, brutish, life in this real world is nasty, brutish, and short. Once you read Hobbes, once you really read Hobbes and you understand it, only
And you
then can you
accept it.
start. And you accept it, then you can start building a better world. I would say that's what I would say. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a wonderful question. And in some ways, it's probably something that we're all going to struggle with in general. Like, as much as we tip our tip our caps to objectivity. I mean, neither one of us is out here hoping to increase conflict through our analysis. We would also like for better understanding and better analysis to lead to less conflict. Many of the wars that have been started in the world have been started not because there was somebody on one side who was like, I'm evil. I want to fight this war to conquer something else. It's because they thought something that was incorrect. Or you can talk about how doing, um, really good analysis can help or can prevent those types of conflicts from breaking out. I guess there are a couple things I would say here. The first is, and I agree with this listener having been around this quite a bit myself, which is that overly idealistic views can hinder effective outcomes. The only sort of barometer by which I would judge these things if I was in this space is, am I effective? So, for instance, if I am going to allow myself to express moral outrage at something that is happening, is it actually helping my cause or not? Because if it's just about catharsis and just about me getting something off of my chest, okay, there are therapists for that, and you should talk to your therapist about it. You shouldn't be beaming it out there, because if you're out there in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt said, and your job is to pursue the normative objective to reduce conflict, that means in some sense you have to be willing to break your own morals in order to do that. So you have to get your hands dirty. There's nobody that's going to actually affect change that is going to be 100% perfect. And in that sense, you have to have a tremendous amount of self-awareness, and you have to tell yourself early on, like, what are my red lines? What am I absolutely not going to cross? And as long as that red line is not there, fine. I'll do anything. And my judgment of whether it will be good or not is not some normative, moralistic benchmark. It is, did this further the goal? And did it further the goal in such a way that was actually effective? And it's surprising. I think I shouldn't say most. I don't want to throw too much shade. I know a lot of people who are in the space who are trying to do things in that sense, and there are so many constraints against them, but it's really hard. And I'll take another wire metaphor here. This listener is Swiss, so I'm not sure that he will get it, but you should go watch the part of the wire about Amsterdam, about the police officer who he's on his way out, he's about to retire, and he basically decides to legalize drugs in a certain part of Baltimore and pushes all of the drug traffic to that zone, Amsterdam. And he notices that violent crime and everything else starts decreasing as long as he allows people to do the drug trade in this part of town. Now, the only reason this guy can do this is because he's about to retire. So in that sense, he is not strictly attuned to the hard realities of international relations. He knows that in 3 months he's out anyway, so he just doesn't give a frack. He's just like, all right, I'm gonna try something and I'm gonna do it. It actually backfires on him because it becomes this huge scandal. and the city can't tolerate it because he's not actually attuned to those hard realities. He gets so frustrated with the thing that's in front of him and he has a good solution that he's not actually doing the job of getting in there and dealing with the hard realities, which in this case would have been fine. Kiss up to the mayor or go to the different caucuses or go to the different factions or pay the Clay Davis guy and figure out the right way to get this pushed through so that you can do this in a way that actually allows you to do it without getting canned or getting the whole thing kind of taken down for it. So yeah, it's a really ironic thing that those, I think, who are most effective at pursuing those normative objectives have to do things that are probably unsavory from the perspective of most people in their tribe, and even from the thing that they are trying to pursue. And that's a very rare personality type that has enough self-awareness and is willing to live with enough dissonance to actually pursue that thing at the same time. I'm not someone who has that, like, too much dissonance for me. I'm aware of it, but I couldn't be in the arena like that, at least not yet in my career. Anything else to say on that, cousin?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
Well said.
Last in this vein, sending this along after hearing the call for mail. Not sure how many of your listeners are under 30, but hearing you all discuss how geopolitical analysis is a young man's game, I am wondering what I can do to break into the niche and become a cousin myself one day. We got a lot of these, but this is the one I chose to read. Would appreciate any insight y'all have. I am in my 20s and just left a decent job as a customs broker to go back to grad school and get a master's degree. So I'm currently doing some soul searching career-wise. Also had the pleasure of being a student, Jacob, of your father at Oxford College. I credit him with informing much of how I think today. Listeners, if any of you are former students of Bill Shapiro and you write in and tell me that you're a student of Bill Shapiro, I will make sure that you get on the question board, first of all. Also, cousin, I was at an event a couple months ago where I was giving a speech at the Montana Grain Growers Association, and this guy came up to me afterwards, and he's actually running for Congress in Montana. And we were talking for like an hour or two, and then he was asking me where I was from, and I said Oxford, Georgia, and he was like, "Oh, I went to Oxford College for 2 years." And I was like, "Yeah, well, my dad taught at anyway." It turned out that like this guy like had taken my dad and like had done like independent studies with my dad on Nietzsche at my house. Like, so really, really small world.
That's so cool.
So let's tell this. And by the way, we got at least 5 or 6 questions of how do I break into this field? So I just chose this one because you got me. You called out my dad. So go for it, cousin.
You know, I think that we're approaching a critical mass where soon enough, corporates are going to have like a chief geopolitical officer role. I don't know if it's going to be taken seriously. It might be like just a jobs program for mid-level and executive management, like all the ESG jobs that are now being like summarily replaced. But I do think, here's what I would say. There's 2 ways to do that. You could do what, Jacob and I did and just spend a lot of time in our 20s trying to, for very little money, be in the political risk consulting industry. Or you can just become an expert at something else while applying a geopolitical and political analytical lens to that. So you don't have to be in the geopolitical political risk industry. You can actually become a great accountant, but just have a view towards politics and geopolitics. You could have that lens wherever you are. And so I think that I've been doing this for a long time, and what I would say is that every year I expect there to be a slew of jobs that are more political and geopolitical analysis. There aren't actually. It's coming very, very slowly. And so what I would say is instead of waiting for those jobs to open up for us to create a new role in a corporate America, you just have to kind of become more geopolitically attuned. That's one of the reasons that Jacob and I have this podcast.
Yeah. A couple things I would add here. I mean, some of this is luck. And I mean, Marco is not kidding when he says work in the political risk space for no money. I mean, the first 6 months I spent at Stratfor, I made $200 a month. Probably would be illegal today. And for the year after I got hired, I believe my annual salary was $27,000 a year or something around that.
Oh, it was. No, it was $27,000 a year.
It was, and by the way, at the time I was like, oh my God, this is great. And now I'm like, what was I doing? Because, then they would offer you like, oh, we're going to give you a 30% raise. And it's like, well, 30% of 27 is really not that great. I'm going to be stuck stuck making no money for the rest of my life. But the thing about I think there are two lessons, because Marco and I both come from the Strat 4 tree, the Strat 4 coaching tree. And I have two pieces of advice here. First of all, like I respected the frack out of George Friedman. Like George Friedman was like he was the sensei. He was like this figure, and I just found him completely inspirational. I found his writing mind bending. I found the way that he thought about the world and communicated about the world amazing. And I didn't care how little money he paid me. I just wanted to work for the man. I just wanted to be the guy who carried his briefcase into the room because I wanted to watch him cook. I wanted to be the guy who got assigned an article at the last minute on a Wednesday, and then George was the only one online, and he'd ping me and he'd be like, "So you having trouble with the article?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know what to do." And he was like, "I'll take care of it." And then an hour later, he'd send in a perfect article, and I'd be like, "How did you do that?" And he'd be like, "Sometimes you just got to trust your fingers," and then sign off. And that was it. I wouldn't hear from him for like another week. The next time I saw him, he'd be telling me to do 30 push-ups. The point being, find someone you really admire and that you need to learn from, and take 3 to 4 years at least and learn from them. Like, you don't have to go do a PhD program somewhere. Like, pick the person that has built something around them and make yourself indispensable to them and learn from them. That was really important. And the second thing about Strat 4, Strat 4 was incredible for so many of us, Peter, Marco, myself, Matt. I mean, the tree out there is pretty incredible, because some of it was a consulting practice, but mostly it was a publishing practice. And so we all had to write on a daily basis and put ourselves out there on a daily basis. And it was actually ahead of its time because we had to put content out there. And I still get people, Marco, who come up to me being like, "Yeah, I've been reading you since your Strat 4 days."
Yep,
Which is,
same.
it got your name out there. It got your articles out there. You were in the realm of ideas. And it's really hard these days, I think, to break into one of those. Your Eurasias, or I mean, Strat 4 has now been bought by Rain. But the other thing you can do if you're in your 20s is just start putting content out. Whether that's your own podcast, whether that's a Substack, the stuff that you write initially, you'll be embarrassed about it in 10 years. You can go back and read some of my shit that I'm embarrassed about from 10 years ago. But the thing that I was good at then, which I'm still good at, is I didn't, as some sniveling 23-year-old, think I knew something. Most of my writing was about how I learned something new and was able to communicate that to folks. And it was that exercise. I was teaching myself, but I was also teaching the person who was reading it something, rather than here's the hot take. Like, it was much more about the how to get there. So just, if this is interesting to you, if you really like this stuff, just start putting out content. I know there's more competition out there, but at the same time, there's more AI slop that is overwhelming everything, that if you're actually putting out good and measured and considered content, it's going to take time. And when I say time, I mean years. It's a grind. It's going to be subscriber by subscriber by subscriber by, maybe you do a free event at a nursing home or something like that, talking about geopolitics to the 85-year-olds. I don't know. Say yes to everything, do everything, put every little piece of content out there, and you have to banish the notion of shame. You are not allowed to be ashamed of things. You have to put yourself out there and be brave enough to say things and write things, and then take the hate mail that inevitably comes in. That's my best advice.
But I would also say a couple of more things, though. So first of all, if you're in your 20s, you're not going to be a global strategist. You're not going to be, if you're in finance, you have zero chance of being a global macro strategist in your 20s.
That's a good point. And neither Marco nor I started like that. Marco started in Europe. I started in the Middle East, specifically Middle East, North Africa. Like, I was just doing North Africa for 4 years.
And so there's two ways to take that, Jacob. If you want to get to a point where you have a podcast and people listen to you and ask you for career advice in political research or geopolitical analysis, you got to embrace the fact that first and foremost, you got to become an expert at something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to take a long time, because the next time you have to become an expert in something, it will take less, and then less, and then less, and less. And eventually you'll be able to bullshit about everything, as Jacob and I do for a living. So, but it means that if you're in your 20s and you're listening to this podcast, you're like, I want to be these guys. Unfortunately for you, you're going to have to spend those 10,000 hours, which has been dispelled, by the way. It's been dispelled, but I use it as a shorthand. You're going to spend like 5 years being an expert at, like, I don't fucking know, like something pretty lame, like.
Well, I'll tell you right now, the first thing I was ever truly an expert in at Stratfor was the Tunisian soybean crushing supply chain, because we had a big client project for soybeans in general, and I was given Tunisia, and nobody knew more about crushing soybeans in Tunisia than I did in 2000.
I was an expert.
2010, 2011. I was really good at it.
I probably can't beat that because that's pretty like random, but like I was an expert at the Lisbon Treaty, man. Like, and nobody cared. In the pecking order at Stratfor, the Africa analyst was more baller than me. Like everybody made fun of me, like, oh, Europe analyst, like I was like the admiral
It's
of the
true.
Swiss Navy.
It's
People
true.
were like, oh, come on. Like, but listen, that's the point. It's not the point. You got to have an anchor because at the end of the day, we are in an epistemic community. You got to know how to know something. You got to learn how to learn, right? And so that's first and foremost what I would say. The second thing is that also tells you don't have to be a geopolitical analyst at all. You don't have to be in this world to think geopolitically. And that's what I meant. Like you might be in an accounting firm, you might be in a fashion industry. There's a geopolitical component, a global component to any business, any endeavor. And so, you can continue to pursue what you're actually good at. But if this is your passion, you can incorporate that passion into what you're good at. And this is, I think, who was it that recently said, like, don't follow your passions? Who was it? It was like the famous podcaster that comments on everything. I forgot his name. My brain just stopped. But basically, he was giving career advice, and it was a really good advice. It really caught my attention. Don't follow.
Was it Scott Galloway?
Yes, it
Yeah.
was Scott Galloway, and this was. I think this is good. A lot of people tell you to focus your passions. You're listening to this. I love geopolitics. It's like, yeah, but you might suck at it, dude. You might actually be good at accounting. You might actually be a great lawyer. You might actually be a great engineer. If this is your passion, continue to listen to us and find a way to incorporate something global, something geopolitical into your life. Like if you're in a really amazing engineer, become an engineer for global infrastructure company. Moves you around. Like you're building bridges in Malaysia and then, like creating infrastructure for mines in like the Amazon. That's cool. Like there's a geopolitical component to your life. You don't have to be a diplomat or a geopolitical analyst or a global macro strategist in finance to have geopolitics in your life.
Yeah.
My dad and your dad, they both influenced us, right? Your dad was a professor of philosophy in political science, which is critical. It's the sinews that bind everything in political science. My dad was in direct sales, bro. He sold cooking pots. But you know what? When the war started in Yugoslavia, he used his geopolitical acumen to pitch, like we were trying to get out of that country. He pitched his boss with an idea to start a business in the Middle East, and he picked the right country for us to go and anchor the business in that would actually, make it successful. And it wasn't Dubai and Abu Dhabi where all the expats went, because he was like, I'm not selling this to expats. I want to sell this to the Arab locals. We can't do that in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So we went to Amman, Jordan. Like that was a geopolitical decision my dad made that made his business he worked for successful. And that's what I mean. There are decisions that are geopolitical in nature in a lot of things. You don't have to quit and become a political, like what we do, because you may not be good at it. You may not be built for this, but you're just interested. And that's enough. That's fine.
All right, turn on the TikTok camera for a second, because I'm going to give you guys a little insight into Jacob Shapiro brain. I'm not actually, like, geopolitics is actually not my great passion. I'm not super passionate about it. When I say that I could stop being a geopolitical analyst when I'm 60, it's because I could stop being a geopolitical analyst when I'm 60, and I could be happy about it. You know what I'm passionate about? I'm like the Tyrion Lannister of this world. I am passionate about drinking and knowing things. All I want is knowledge. I'm obsessed with learning things. So when I got the project about the Tunisian soybean supply crushing thing, if you're out there thinking, I'm going to be a macro strategist, I want to be a geopolitical strategist, you're probably like, oh my God, that sounds like the worst project ever. It was the best project ever. I loved it. I loved mapping it out. I loved understanding all the intricacies. I loved understanding how it connected with the global soybean supply. Like it was all like perfect for me. It was all about wanting to know things in general, which gets me to maybe my favorite fictional character, Rust Cole from True Detective. He says life's barely long enough to get good at one thing, so be careful what you get good at. I have felt that more than once about geopolitics in my life. Like I got good at geopolitics really by happenstance. Like it was an accident. We can talk about my like long career arc before, but there are so many cookie cutter. I got a master's degree in international relations, or I did this or that. Like all those people are out there. They're boring. Like they have the same takes. Like I didn't study geopolitics in college. My degree is in Middle Eastern studies, but it's in medieval Islamic philosophy. I was reading Al-Farabi, and I was reading Maimonides, and I was trying to do all this like crazy shit at the time and trying to connect these things in general. And that brain is what was valuable to folks. Like it's
Yeah.
wanting to know things
Yeah.
and being willing to do the work and then sharing that work with people and having enough self-confidence that people want to read it. I used to train analysts at Stratfor and then at GPF, and I would say this all the time. 95% of the people that I tried to train, they were smart enough to do the job, but the 5% that succeeded were the 5% that were willing to put themselves out there and were willing to cope with the feedback from when they put themselves out there about the things that they were trying to learn that they were not experts in yet. Like it's that gene. You have to care about being right, but not so much that it stops you from putting yourself out there. So it's like this weird juxtaposition.
I mean, it's interesting. Like a lot of people in this industry are not necessarily like trained in it. Our colleague and friend Matt Gherkin, former colleague, he was the first person I hired at BCA Research to come help me in a significant way. And I remember sitting down with him and talking about this. And what I told him is like, hey, Matt, like he and I, we started the same day, so we're older than you, and we were kind of from an earlier like cohort. And I just remember being so impressed with him precisely because he didn't come from Yugoslavia, whose country fell apart, didn't grow up in Iraq and Jordan. So he wasn't born into this the way I was. He was just really good at learning. And that's I think the key. Like learning how to learn is critical for geopolitics because otherwise you'll fall apart and you'll get sucked in by some Substack. And you'll think that reading some blog by someone insightful makes you informed. And like that's what I mean. Like you first have to become an expert at something so that you can learn what it feels like to actually know something. You need to know what you don't know in order to know when you actually fucking know something. And that does not require a degree in international relations or the life that I've lived when I was a kid. I mean, it's helpful, but it's not necessary. It just requires you to become really good at achieving expertise. Once you know how to achieve expertise, you know how much you don't know about the world or particular subject matter. And then you go and you find information about it. And then you go and listen to the podcast where Jacob just minutes ago said, and then you read the primary resources. You don't rely on the secondary. Just because there's a quote in Reuters doesn't mean it actually happened, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's also a great point. And I hope that we didn't discourage anyone. I think the point of this is that if this is interesting to you, you can always be an expert at something else and just use geopolitics and politics to enrich your life at the end of the day and to make some decisions that at certain moments of your life may be critical.
Yeah, well, and to your point about the pots in Amman, Jordan, find the thing that you think nobody is talking about that you think somebody should be talking about and become an expert on it. And start putting yourself out there on that thing. And you got to find the right thing, and you got to be able to be an expert, and you got to be able to express it. But people will notice you if
and remember one very important thing: if you're young, what everyone's telling you to go to, like the language to study and all this stuff, like it's almost always entirely wrong.
Oh, yeah, don't. That's, I mean, why do you think I was doing Arabic at Cornell? Like, it was right after 9/11. If I could go back in time, I would be in the Chinese program, not with the ROTC
And now you probably don't
it.
want to be in the Chinese program. You probably want to learn, I don't know, Spanish.
Yeah, that would have been a good one. I think Chinese, I actually think would have been the right. I think that would have been the right one.
No, I mean now.
I still think now. Yeah,
okay.
But I'm bullish.
Yeah, it's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Okay, let's get into some content related ones. We're not going to get to all your questions, listeners, and don't worry. This is not a one-time thing. We'll start doing this maybe once a quarter. So
let's get some.
We didn't get to.
Let's get to some spicy ones. Man, these are very
spicy ones.
PG rated. You know what I mean? Like let's spice it up. I know there's one that I'm waiting for. The one I read, the one that got to me.
Oh God, yeah. I wasn't even going to actually. I wasn't. No? You can read that one if you want to bring it up. No, we have people sent in great questions. I'm going to waste my time with that one. Okay, but yeah, maybe I'll bring it up at the end. All right, let's start getting to some content ones. This is from someone we both know, Marco. I'll let you know who it is afterwards. But he asks, how about some discussion on shadow fleets? Sounds like Western countries are getting more bold in seizing Russian shadow fleet ships. Are we getting to a point where having that much oil offline will have an impact on prices? Also, does China have a shadow fleet? Thanks.
China buys from shadow fleets of others. So yes. China does well, I don't want to I don't really know. But China definitely is consuming oil that's been delivered by shadow fleets. Um, I think one risk right now is that policymakers are not macro strategists. You know, so policymakers did go to a couple of experts in the oil industry, and I can tell you that I talked to the same people in Zug, in Geneva, the famous places that have been in the news many, many times. And I can tell you that what they're all telling policymakers, which is like, there's a lot of oil. Don't worry about it. The problem is that once you get emboldened by that fact, there can quickly not be a lot of oil out there. So, yes, I think that's a great question, amazing question. And I would say that the consensus view in the world right now amongst very smart oil traders is that there's plenty oil. And I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that that's the case.
Yeah, there's two parts of the question, which is the shadow fleet part of the question, and then there's the oil part of the question. Um, and when it comes to the shadow fleet thing, like this is one of those things where I think I at least first have to say, like, I don't really know. And there's two different things I think we're talking about here too. I think when most people are talking about the shadow fleet today, they're talking about these aging oil tankers that are using various tactics to transport sanctioned oil, primarily from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. So they're talking about vessels that they're often older, their ownership structures are hard to dig into. They're not insured in any meaningful sense. They'll try to disguise their routes, whether that's by turning off some of their like transponders or trying to spoof their locations and things like that. And of course, they're registered in countries with sort of lax maritime regulations. And so we're talking about that
That,
because
but
of the sanctions on Russian oil and because how important oil is to the economy. But this has been, we've had quote unquote shadow fleets since we've had ships in the world. Like this is what the pirates and the buccaneers and what the smugglers were always doing. I did back in the day when I was carrying George's briefcase around when I was in that phase of my career. I remember we were in Bucharest at an event and I was sitting next to this guy he was incredible, and he was telling me about how it was in the late 70s, early 80s. And this is Romania, so they're under Ceausescu. This is like one of the worst of the guys out there in the in the Soviet realm. So pretty grim. But he decided to work at the port because if he worked at the port, there were smugglers who would bring in banned music into Romania, and he just loved music. He was obsessed with Led Zeppelin and with Pink Floyd. So he worked at the port only because he could become friends with these smugglers who would come in and who would bring in this banned music that he would get to listen to, and then he would be the one that would be spreading his music to everyone. I'm telling you that story because there's like shadow fleets all the time. I think we assume that even in the unipolar world that every ship has an identification and everything is buttoned up and going exactly sort of in a meaningful way. But of course, people are moving goods, whether it's drugs or humans or sanctioned oil or anything else, like illegally stolen things or things that are counterfeit or things where you stole something and you're trying to make a profit on somewhere else. So like there is a shadow fleet out there. And I don't really, in the same way that I don't know about the dark web, like I know it's there and I don't interact with it. I don't really know how to like benchmark its importance. And as for the oil point, I mean, I'll take the opposite of what Marco just said, which is it seems to me that there is a bunch of oil out there. Um, and I don't think we even need to get into the shadow fleet. I think even without the shadow fleet, if the Saudis wanted to really start pumping, like there would be plenty of oil out there. If oil hit 60 a barrel, the shale producers in the United States would rev up. Guyana is just revving up. There are different, we're making oil discoveries all the time. I forget which Southeast Asian, I think, was it Vietnam that just announced a huge discovery? Or maybe not Vietnam. Somebody in Southeast Asia just announced a huge discovery. Like, it's not like we're short on oil in the market. One of my favorite charts to show in my presentations is it's a chart that shows the prices of wheat, corn, and oil going back to 1850. And oil is obviously way above corn and wheat. Corn and wheat have just been going down and to the right for over a century and a half, even during wars. But oil starts to, do all this, go up and down all over the place. And I often tell audiences when I'm showing that chart, which is, yeah, the reason oil does that is because there's a cartel of oil producers that set the price. And they wanted the price to actually be inflated. If oil just worked as a market, if there wasn't a cartel that was controlling 40 or 50% of production, it would be as cheap on a relative basis as corn is or as wheat is. The problem is just that try and get 5 American wheat farmers to agree on anything, let alone all of the American wheat farmers to agree on something, and then create a cartel of wheat producing countries in the world. Like, it's not going to happen. So like, so much of this is controlled, and I think that these countries and these actors can increase supply if they want to, and if they don't want to, that means that they want prices to go up. So that was kind of a long, ambivalent answer. And does China have a shadow fleet? Sure, everybody has a shadow fleet. Like, do nations have shadow fleets? Do nations have people in them who do the dirty work of having shadow fleets so that people can get the things that they want, even if the nation doesn't technically? Yeah, like, yes, this is like the gray zone of the economy, without which the global economy doesn't work. So, I rambled a little bit. Okay, let's go. Next gentleman loves the show. Can't wait for every episode. Okay. Wanted to ask, if Iraq is the outcome of a fake multipolar disguised as a moral unipolar world, then wouldn't Vietnam and Korea be the outcome of a real multipolar world? Does it not seem more likely for there to be more conflict in a multipolar world? When we abandon the illusion of morality, does this actually make us safer? Defense lawyers might be pragmatists, but is there not an inherent belief in the morality of the judicial system?
I don't understand the second part of that question, but I can answer the first.
Yeah.
So we know from political science that a multipolar world will produce more conflict. That's a fact. That's a game theoretical fact. It's a mathematical fact. The whole point of a unipolar world is that only one country can pursue a foreign policy. The whole point of a bipolar world is that there's only 2 countries that can pursue genuine sovereign foreign policies. In a multipolar world, you have a bunch. So by definition, you will have more potential pairings of countries to go to war. The issue, though, is that there's no existential bipolar cleavage. So wars can both occur at a higher rate, higher probability, but they're also kind of petty. Like Azerbaijan and Armenia went to war in 2020. Their conflict was not immediately taken up by 2 forces that run the planet. Like, China didn't come and take over Azerbaijan, and America didn't come over and help Armenia. And then it becomes something different. It's not a war over Nagorno-Karabakh. It suddenly becomes a war for global domination in the Caucasus. And think about Korean War or a Vietnamese war. Like, these wars became something more than just Korea or Vietnam. Whereas today, like, even Ukraine, which I would concede is bigger than just about Donbas. But even like Ukraine, I can see it ending with a deal over Donbas. Like, it's, that it is what it is. Like, so I would say that in a multipolar world, while yes, probability of conflict is much higher, they're often not as vicious as the wars in a bipolar world.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think the questioner asks, wouldn't Vietnam and Korea be the outcome of a real multipolar world? No, those are the outcome of a bipolar world. Vietnam and Korea are not conflicts out of a multipolar world. To get back to multipolar conflict, I mean, World Wars I and II are the ultimate result of the multipolar era of the second half of the 19th century. Like, when I sometimes say there's a monster waiting at the end of the forecast, like, that's the monster. Like, can we avoid the World War II, World War I, World War II monster? But that's really the end of the order in some sense. The wars that Mark was talking about, it's like the Crimean War.
Yeah,
it's about
the original
reunification of
Crimean.
Germany. Like that's the sort of conflict that you're going to see more.
But one thing I would say, though, I do think that in Mersheimer's phraseology. By the way, if anybody wants to like read about this, John Mersheimer wrote the book "The Tragedy of Great Power Politics," where he literally answers these questions. The balanced multipolar world became unbalanced, partly because there was a revanchist power that said, "I don't like the way we have delineated spheres of influence. I want it differently." And so that's how you get into these world wars that Jacob is talking about. I would just say one thing, and I know I mentioned this at a previous podcast. I do think that nuclear weapons could actually lock us in the best outcome, which is a balanced multipolar world for a very long time. Why? Because it's even if you're like imagine if we gave nuclear weapons to the Ottoman Empire. The whole problem in First World War, the reason we had the First World War is because Ottoman Empire began to fail, and there were all these kind of virgin lands, like new countries starting in the former Ottoman Empire that somebody wanted to pick off and expand their sphere of influence. But if we just gave the Ottomans a nuclear weapon, they would have felt maybe safer. They would have been more difficult to pick off by other powers. And so I do think that that's maybe a bad example. I'm just spitballing here. But what I'm saying is that usually unbalanced multipolarity does lead to a world war. I'm just not sure that with nuclear weapons that would happen. And so we might just stay permanently in a multipolar world, which is not that bad. It does increase the frequency of war, but those wars are often not as vicious. They're limited. They're for specific goals. Like I want Alsace-Lorraine. I don't think that the French people are all evil. Like that's not the point. Like it's just like, hey, this territory here, I want it. Like the famous Schleswig-Holstein War between Prussia and Denmark was about Schleswig-Holstein. That was it. It wasn't about anything else.
Yeah, I've been watching the Ken Burns American Revolution documentary, and also reading this great book about the geopolitics of the Lakota. And one
Oh,
of
nice.
they're one of the Sioux people in 18th, 19th century northern Great Plains, United States, and it's great because like so much of what's happening in I mean it's not the United States at the time. So much of what is happening in North America is because of like crazy and the French like picked a fight with the English, or the English were fighting with the Spanish again, or the Austrians were doing this, and so it's this it's a great example of what you're talking about. Okay, I'm going to try and get us through 3 more questions here before we close it out. And this one is a little pertinent to what's going on in the news. Well, this week, this is going to publish in a few days, so we'll see if it's still relevant. But and this guy has a long 2-part question, so I'm only going to take the second half of his 2-part question. A lot of U.S. technology platforms, X, Meta, Google, YouTube, Amazon, etc., that underpin what many global consumers consider to be the internet, owe their current leadership position mainly through monopolistic practices than they do to any form of true technical innovation. For instance, most of the technology to deliver an Amazon or X-like platform is available and relatively straightforward to build. China has already, in effect, pursued this strategy, building replica businesses, WeChat, Alibaba, etc., and blocking U.S. services, creating a national version of the internet for their consumers. I think Trump is accelerating a balkanization of the internet, and I'm pretty sure that Europe will take a similar approach to China. This would be catastrophic for U.S. big tech, as ex-U.S., Europe is their biggest revenue market. If they lose Europe, it would punch a big hole in their income statements. Am I mad, or do you guys think this is likely to happen?
What a great question. I mean, I've been hearing that Europeans, this was reported in the news, are considering replacing Teams and Zoom with like locally derived software. And I do think this is I mean, look, at the end of the day, you got to innovate locally to have, alternatives. On the other hand, like, are Teams and Zoom really that like innovative at this point? It's 2026, it's not 2002. So I don't think the person is mad. I think it's a great question. I do think on some level it will happen. I would also say that it's fine. Let's not overemphasize the balkanization of the internet. It cannot happen. Jacob, remember the days when somebody would send you like a file and it was from a Mac and you couldn't open it?
I do.
Okay. Those days are gone. Just like when I was a kid, I think I used this.
Except when I send you the mailbag questions ahead of time, and you
which
can't
is
open it on your
crazy because we
computer,
were both using the same computer. I don't know. That's just my IT. But a good example of this also is, when I was a kid, I used this example before. I'll do it again. I would get tapes of the Lakers sent to me from my great uncle who was living in Pacific Palisades, and I would get this tape and I would put it in my VCR. It couldn't work, and I would start crying because I couldn't watch Magic. This is how much I loved Magic Johnson, 5-year-old Marco. And then finally, many years later, we got a VCR that could play both systems, Balsecum and NTSC, whatever. There were two systems, and like the tapes just didn't work, like. So you had to have a VCR that played both of them. So all I would say is that yes, I do think this moment is coming. Like Europeans are preparing legislation that will force all companies to store user data in data centers in Europe. Like you can see this like nationalism of software is clearly happening. I just don't think it's going to be a big deal because this is why we have innovation. We will have ways to navigate all of these. Just like we have Google Translate now to bring us together. You can literally just like AirPods that you can talk to in a different language. It will simultaneously translate. Similarly, we will have technology to actually, like if you're on a Chinese system or a European one or American, it's not going to be that big of a deal, except for the part that person said, that the listener, this could significantly eat into profits of, supposedly global software companies.
Yeah, that's the big one. And first of all, like maybe one of these companies could invent a pair of Bluetooth headphones that don't drop every
I
time my
know,
phone turns on or a
right?
speaker turns on or something like that. It's very hard for me to engage with some of these conversations sometime when there's just
Yeah.
like basic blocking and tackling that we're not doing. I know that that's a silly thing to say. That's mostly a joke.
It's not a
Um,
silly thing.
but
It's pain point.
I think there's a really interesting tension between these global tech companies and between governments. During the first Trump administration, when they went after Huawei,
Mhm.
ironically, going after Huawei was a silly thing to do because
Yep.
Huawei had way more in common with Microsoft than it did with the Chinese Communist Party. And by going after Huawei, they just made sure that Huawei would have to kowtow to the Chinese Communist Party in order to stay alive. So I think this listener is actually right about Trump accelerating balkanization in a weird way, and I think that when I say that there's a tension, I don't know who's stronger. I don't know whether the tech companies are stronger or whether these governments are stronger. Because we are geopolitical analysts, I'm always going to fall back on the guys with guns. Like the monopoly of power is with the governments. And if the governments want to control these things, or if the governments want to nationalize the internet or do whatever it is they want to do, I think the tech companies are going to have to go along. And if a tech company does not go along with the national priorities of its government, there's going to be problems. Even if a tech company is not like a part of the national priorities of its government, just by being associated with it, you're going to start earning the ire of, in this case, if you're a U.S. tech company, you didn't do anything wrong. You're not out there wanting to annex Greenland or anything like that. But sorry, you're an American tech company, and President Trump is talking about invading Greenland with U.S. military forces. So that means, yes, the French want a French version of Zoom, and eventually they'll want French data centers and French Gmail and French everything else. French Google Translate and sort of
But
blah blah blah. And yeah, go.
So let me go back because I want to really emphasize something here. You of course know the famous poem by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, which starts off, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist," and so on and so on. And then finally, then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So let me play a little violin for American software companies. Because the story here is actually quite interesting. In 2013, Snowden flies to Hong Kong and does the worst intelligence leak in American history. In that intelligence leak, he basically points out that American companies, hardware and software, have all these backdoors in them that the US government has put in there. And what the Chinese do is they use this moment to say, aha, all of American software and hardware is evil. So they effectively block access to China of American, tech giants, which by 2013-14 were starting to become like the greatest companies on the planet. It was at this point, basically a couple of years later, Donald Trump comes to power in 2016, and Silicon Valley decides that they're going to wrap themselves in the American flag. Because at the same time that Donald Trump is rising and becoming quite aggressive towards China, there's something else that's rising, which is antitrust fever against those same tech giants. And so the tech giants just make a very simple, calculation. We have no way to access China. China said no to us because of this leak and because now they have an excuse to build their own infrastructure. So how do we protect ourselves from antitrust. And what they do is they become extremely anti-China. Right? Because I mean, at the end, they prove to be correct because China starts making software that threatens them, like TikTok obviously threatens Mark Zuckerberg's Instagram. Right? So why am I saying this? Because, now we're going to be sad about everybody else doing the same thing with their own. Like, of course, if you end up wrapping yourself in the American flag and you say, well, that's okay because it's only China that's then going to hate us. You've actually limited yourself now to only 400 million people because there's plenty of other countries now when it's clear that we're in a multipolar world, where it's clear that America is not magnanimous, it's Machiavellian. It's not just China that's going to be barred to you. It's also everyone else. And this is where I would say the NVIDIA approach is much more sophisticated. NVIDIA's got the Michael Jordan approach. Republicans buy Nikes too, baby. Right? That's why Michael Jordan famously said he got a lot of criticism for it. Republicans buy Nikes too. Why did he say that? I'm not going to talk about anything. I'm going to sell my product. And I would argue that the Microsofts and the Facebooks and the Googles should have stuck to that line, should have never wrapped themselves up in the American flag, should have just taken antitrust like a man in the face, like a punch, and rolled with it. Because now, by wrapping themselves in nationalism, they are now a target of not just Chinese, but potentially global, tech nationalism. Whereas NVIDIA is like, no, we build chips, baby. Okay? We're going to build them. Chinese buy chips too.
We design chips. Like they're caught in the same thing. Like they're going to be screwed too.
But
I think.
Okay, maybe, perhaps. And obviously, there's a whole book about this, chip wars, and everybody thinks. But I still think that NVIDIA's corporate policy was superior. Maybe it's almost like they think of geopolitics in a more sophisticated way. In other words, I think that Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, their corporate board probably had some governance guy sitting in DC, only knows American politics, who made a decision like, hey man, China, let's just cut it out. It's a sunk cost. Let's triple down on being basically American nationalists, thinking that there was no way that one day South Korea, Japan, and European markets would be threatened by the same policy. They should have thought about that. Where NVIDIA is saying like, we're going to lobby the US government that selling chips to China is cool. And I think that, and you know why I say this? Because there was a moment in 2013 after Snowden. Yes, China had the moral high ground in a way to go hard against America and say, hey, bro, you put all these backdoors, like we're going to ban Facebook or whatever. I think there was a moment when American tech corporations could have gone to the government and said, this is protectionism. America doesn't sell toaster ovens. America doesn't sell t-shirts. America will never sew jeans again. Screw all this low cost. This is America's export. Service tech. Go to Beijing and tell them you'll put 100% tariff unless they continue to buy Microsoft Office. No, you don't get to ban this stuff because Snowden said there's backdoors. Give me a break. You got backdoors in Huawei. That would have been a more appropriate course of action. But hey, they didn't pay us, the big money to advise them, because that's what I would have said to Google and Microsoft. Don't give up the fight. Don't give up China. Don't give up China. Go tell the Obama administration to grow backbone and slap 100% tariff on China unless they negate their national security, cybersecurity law, which ended American tech access to China. And it's funny to me because the reason this kind of happened is that all the tech companies just said, you know what, screw it. We're just not going to compete for China. Let's just make sure we don't get antitrust on ourselves here in America because we're always going to have Europe and Japan. Well, not sure you will.
Yep. Agree with that. All right, last two. Back in fall of 2025, you guys had a great discussion about what Trump's focus could be coming into the upcoming midterms. Per Real Clear Politics and most other polls, Trump's approval rating is still bouncing around the lowest levels. Will Trump start to care? Republicans seem to be worried about the midterms, but Trump doesn't seem to be. Would be interesting to hear a discussion on if he will care, and if not, what will it mean if he loses one leg of the red wave or both House and Senate?
Not sure where our reader or listener why they think that Trump doesn't care. I mean, Trump is a winner. He likes winners. He considers himself a winner.
Well, I mean, I would venture that this reader is probably saying, well, if he did care, wouldn't he be doing things strategically to help boost his numbers in the polls? Which goes back to what I was saying before, which is he doesn't, even if he wants, yes, he wants to win and he does care, he is physically incapable of the kind of discipline that it takes to have a strategy over 12 months to go into the midterms. He just cannot do it. So go for it. I can feel the TDSDS brewing within you.
It's coming.
Embrace the dark side of the force.
Like, wait, hold a second. I got to do my TDS derangement syndrome. Okay. You got to gift me some pills for this, by the way, because, okay, let me take the other side of this. Okay. All right. What the fuck is he supposed to do? All right. Like, the number one issue in America is affordability and inflation. Inflation is clearly down from the Joe Biden years. Affordability is as bad as it's ever been. But are we going to pin affordability issues at Trump's feet? I will. I'll blame Donald Trump. You want me to blame Donald Trump for affordability? Here's how I will do it. Has nothing to do with tariffs. Forget tariffs. No, the reason he is partly to blame is because he and his best friend Nancy Pelosi blew $3 trillion during the pandemic when we didn't need to blow $3 trillion during the pandemic. And then Joe Biden was like, well, I want the same thing. So he tripled down on that. Mm-hmm. The fiscal policy of the United States of America has been irresponsible since 2017. And yes, he kind of started the whole pro-cyclical fiscal stimulus, but like Nancy Pelosi wasn't holding him back. She was daring him to do more. So like, what am I getting at here? I think Donald Trump has no way to overcome these issues. And so all his advisors, all the learned, and our listener too, clearly a sophisticated person who has followed politics for a long time, is saying like, why isn't he trying to fix it? How the hell are you going to fix this in 10 months, in 9 months? So what he's doing instead is he's doing the typical Donald Trump thing where he's like, all my advisors are stupid. All the establishment kind of like elites are stupid. I'm going to win this midterm election on foreign policy alone. And it's like, brother, you're not the president of France. You're president of the United States of America. Nobody gives a shit.
Also, you're not doing things that are popular on foreign policy.
Well, okay, but let's imagine a world, Jacob. First of all, Venezuela, like, who's mad about that? Like,
Venezuela's fine. Greenland.
Wait, time out. But he got out of that because obviously it's unpopular. So let's focus. Let's just imagine for a second. He gets the Russia-Ukraine peace deal before the midterms, and these negotiations in Oman, which while we're recording this, the news flow is like Iranians are actually kind of happy about them. Let's say that he gets, and you know what, if he gets a deal with Iran, by the way, buddy, we all know it's going to be like the Obama deal. It's just going to be better because it was Trump.
Yeah, it's going to be worse, but okay.
But fine, no, but you know what I mean. Like, it's just going to be like labeled yes, differently. And then there's like a peace deal in Russia, Ukraine. I'm just saying, I think what he thinks is he can pull off something no one else has done. And I'm just here to say to our listener, like, that's why I don't think he doesn't care. I just think that he fairly, I think, incorrectly knows there's no way to fix affordability in 9 months. So he's doing something that no president has ever done, other than maybe George W. Bush post 9/11. But it's like win the midterms of foreign. That's what he's doing. And I think it will fail because Americans don't care about foreign policy. Like, I don't like he can solve all these issues perfectly. I just don't think he will be rewarded. This is America. It's not France.
I disagree with you. I don't think he's even thought as far as you're giving him credit for. I think he literally can't help himself. Things that he could do over the next 10 months to not get killed in the midterms, not support policies that have ICE shooting down people in Minneapolis, not posting things on Truth Social or whatever it is of the Obamas head superimposed.
I disagree
on
with you.
Not going after European allies and doing all like.
I disagree with everything you just said, and data backs me up. Data backs me up, and here's why: if he didn't do any of those things, like this is not even this is not debatable. Like inflation and affordability are so far above all other issues. And he's polling better on immigration. Your point that ICE shooting people in the streets is causing him to lose the midterms is absolutely incorrect. He's polling better on that crazy stuff. Listen, we're not.
His ratings are down on immigration in the last
They're
month.
down, but they are much worse on affordability. All I'm saying is that if President Trump delivered a comprehensive immigration reform in a bipartisan fashion last year, if he invited the Obamas to come back to the White House, and if he solved like all slew of other problems that liberals hate him for, he would still get crushed in the midterms because the number one issue by far is inflation and affordability. And the funny thing about this, and I think it's ironic and paradoxical, he's now establishment, Jacob. Americans are mad. Americans have been mad for 10 years minimum, since 2016 at least, really since 2008. Whoever's in power is to blame. And the truth is the system itself is broken. So when Hillary Clinton represents the establishment, Donald Trump wins. When Donald Trump is in power, he's the establishment, he's going to lose. That's what I would say is the real problem. There's no way he can, the ICE thing, it's not helping him. I completely agree with you. It's
okay, well, then some other things he could do, which fall under the economy stupid, is maybe stop jerking around the tariff rate 5 different ways a Sunday based on how he's feeling.
It's just not.
Maybe stop threatening Jerome Powell with being investigated Jacob, for whatever he's being investigated with.
Every single PhD in economics should turn in their diploma. They were all wrong on tariffs. No, it's a fact.
Oh, no, they wouldn't. I mean, I'm not here to defend the economist. Don't make me explain.
Find me an economist that said tariffs will be fine, because they have been fine. Where's the recession?
I think the jury is still out. There has not been a recession, but the jury is still out on whether we're fine with tariffs.
We had a vast majority of people thinking we were going to have a recession last year. We got like 5% quarterly growth in Q3.
That doesn't mean everything is fine.
I agree with you. But what's not fine, this is really important. Like, this is really crucial. What's not fine is not the things that Trump brought to the table. Like, this is my point. He cannot win the midterms. If he did everything correctly, if he didn't put the tariffs on, we would still have an affordability crisis in America. That's what we should take from this. And that's why it's not that I have sympathy for him, but I can kind of see why he's like overemphasizing foreign policy. That's something presidents usually do after they lose the midterms, not before. I just don't think there's any, listen, Jacob, he delivered astronomical quarter-on-quarter GDP growth in Q3 and Q4. The reason that we have a K-shaped economy is that we were always going to have a K-shaped economy. And why? Because we had a bipartisan consensus to pursue Argentinian fiscal policies in this country, and we're paying for that. And he's going to, somewhat correctly, because he started it in 2017, but that's what the comeuppance is. And that's why I'm disagreeing with you. The reason I'm disagreeing with you vehemently is not because I'm defending Trump. I'm trying to say that what's wrong with America is not some stupid 10% tariff.
It's not the tariff. And yes, I think you're right about the structural issues. I'm just saying all the unforced errors, all the can't help himself moments. Basically, I think there was a chance that they could have tried to at least keep the House.
I think there's
even
no
with
way.
Everything else that was going on.
They were never going to win.
Well,
never.
There's definitely not now. He's lost some swing votes based on his behavior.
Here's two truths, and I know you agree with me with both of them. First of all, it's very difficult for a president to win the midterms. So he was always going to lose the House because right. He walked in with a 3-seat majority in the House. Come on, history is
5, I think. Yeah, but still bad.
Dude, the history and the numbers were against him anyways. So but the other thing that I really think is important is that the structural issues are such that we're in a stage of American history where I think it's going to be tough for incumbents to just win. People are pissed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Think about it. Trump, the last president we had that won 2 terms consecutively was the guy elected in 2008. Holy shit, that's a long time ago. It's 18 years ago.
Yeah, that was
18 years ago was the last time the president won like 2 consecutive elections, man. Like, think about that. And there's a reason for that. And it's because whoever comes to power, if they don't start addressing these secular affordability issues, they're going to be screwed. And the only way to do that, unfortunately, for our two parties, which are so ideologically rigid, unfortunately, it's to kind of adopt some right-wing supply-side reforms because we need more supply. And it's going to have to, unfortunately, for the right, be about better redistribution of wealth. Sorry, guys.
Yes, paging Senator Tillis. If you're listening, 1 hour, 28 minutes into the podcast, this is where you should start taking notes. All right, last one before we get out of here. We should end now, but I can't not put this one in the first one. If we didn't get to you, we will get to you next time. So, Jacob and Marco, love the podcast. Thank you for putting it out there. I figure it will take a while to turn the entire world into Wisconsin, so I have a question in the meantime. I always figured you threw Wisconsin out there as an example of a geopolitically irrelevant block of generally uninteresting land filled with people who have been raised from a young age to drink far too much beer and cows. It's interesting, though, that each of you seems to visit the dairy state on a semi-regular basis, I presume to speak about geopolitics. Why would such a geopolitically benign horde of hill people be so interested in the subject? Is that common? If Wisconsin isn't worth talking about, which is likely, what is the most geopolitically mundane place you can think of? And what would have to happen for that place to become a top 5 in geopolitical relevance? Thanks. Sincerely from Wisconsin.
Oh, man. I think this is one of the great the reasons why Wisconsin and lots of parts of the Midwest are the greatest parts of America, because of self-deprecating humor and just strong Lutheran Nordic work ethic, respect for fellow man. And, even though, yes, you are truly stuck in the middle of the continent, like you are quadruple landlocked, my friend. There is just something about Minnesota, Wisconsin, these like northern kind of states that just is incredible. Like and by the way, universities are great, education is great, right? Like, just incredible part of America. So I will continue to shout out Wisconsin as what we should all strive to be.
I don't think it's fair to say that they're landlocked. I mean, Wisconsin
yeah,
is bordered by Lake
Seaway.
Superior and Lake Michigan, so
St.
it's
Lawrence
kind of
Seaway.
a general network.
Even Minnesota.
I also,
Duluth, Minnesota was connected to the Atlantic. You're correct. But I think I do think the ethnic makeup also matters. No, sort of not necessarily ethnic, more cultural. The cultural makeup of these places was kind of worldly. There is still that kind of like hard Protestant work ethic that comes from, the Swedes, who
the Norwegian bachelor farmers. I'm a huge fan of Garrison Keillor, so my love for the Midwest comes honestly. I was listening to Prairie Home, was raised on Prairie Home Companion in my house. And
me too. 100%.
Yeah,
Well, I wasn't raised on it, but it was more in my 20s when I came. But I was like, what is this? What is this incredible, like, awesomeness? It's awesome.
Yeah, my dad used to tape Prairie Home every single day. So I was actually cleaning out his basement the other day, and I have tapes going back to the 80s of Prairie Home Companion. He was just recording the tapes.
Hey, do you remember Mike Marchio from Stratford?
Of course I remember Mike.
Hey, shout out Mike. Hey, this guy started his career, I think, working for that show.
Oh, what? Oh, I actually have a Garrison Keillor story for you. He was doing some kind of reunion show in St. Louis, and I dragged my wife to it to go see it. And then I saw him in the airport the next day, and I was really nervous, which I don't normally get nervous around people. And my wife was like, "You got to go talk to him. You're going to regret not talking to him for the rest of life. You got to go talk to him." So he was sitting in this airport restaurant in St. Louis, and he ordered the soup. And then I went over and I said, "Mr. Keillor, I wanted to introduce myself. I was at your show yesterday. You made a joke about there being a bunch of old people there, but I was actually also there too. And I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you've done." And he was like, "Oh, thank you so much." And then he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a geopolitical analyst." And I tried to explain what that was. And he said, "Oh, so what do you think about the Russia-Ukraine war?" And so I spent the next 15 minutes briefing Garrison Keillor on the Russia-Ukraine war in the airport in St. Louis. And then after he had gotten all the information, he was very like, "Okay, great, good luck." And then his soup came and he went, and that was it. But I think that this gentleman from Wisconsin, I think you're underestimating the importance of some of these states. I mean, Minnesota is home of some of the most important companies in the United States. If you go back even to like early tech companies in the United States, they come from Minnesota.
For sure.
Wisconsin itself, I mean, still one of the states in the union where manufacturing is the top job. They're still manufacturing things in Wisconsin. It have been for a long time. They're
Kohler.
growing things in Wisconsin. It's a
Great
big part.
urinals.
Yep, Kohler, exactly. Big part of the agricultural supply chain. Like Wisconsin is not unimportant. Like the Midwest is not unimportant. I think the Midwest, to your point, has this self-deprecating, oh, we're not that important actually. But you take away the Midwest, like that, the Louisiana Purchase opens up the Midwest, creates the United States. There is no United States without, the American
100%.
dominating the Midwest. So like,
Well-
don't shortchange yourself. And I also think that the things that happen in these parts of the country, this is why, I'll speak for myself. I've never wanted to live in DC. I won't live in DC. People are always surprised I don't live in DC or New York. I can't learn anything in
No.
DC and New York. I learn way more
100%.
when I go to Wisconsin or when I go to North Dakota or when I go to someplace out west that nobody, like, flyover country is actually where things happen. And there has been this thing that's happened in geopolitics over the last 30, 40 years where the urban liberal elites think that because of technology and because of culture, the hillbillies from the center of the country don't matter and they're just polluting everything and they're not with the green revolution or they're not with this, they're not with that. The people in the cities don't exist without the people that are in the center. And some of the populist revolt that we've seen, not all of it, but some of it is flyover country being like, screw you. You don't have any food and you don't have any manufactured goods and you have no strategic depth if you're not going to think about our interests. And we're going to vote for the people, even if they don't represent us, who at least recognize that the current system is rigged and will give us a chance of upending thing in some sense. So don't, and Wisconsin has been a battleground state, by the way, in the United States in the past couple of elections. It's been a really, really important place to watch this political tension happening in the United States. So it's like, don't shortchange yourself, Wisconsin. Like Marco and I love you for different reasons. Like cheese curds, wonderful, spotted cow, I'm here. But like, you're actually very important. So,
well, that's why I'm kind of surprised. I'm surprised that nobody from from Midwest has risen to contest the presidency. It's almost, you know what I mean? Like, every time I meet someone from the Midwest, I mean, this is almost universal. I don't think I've ever run into someone from the Midwest who was overly partisan one way or another. I'm sure it exists, but I haven't found. And so I'm surprised that has not happened.
Yeah, I mean, Gretchen Whitmer is on my short list of interesting candidates.
You've said that before,
for the next run.
Yeah, no, I know, and I agree with you. I think she would be very, very formidable opponent for the Republicans, and I think that there are many Republicans from the Midwest who would equally,
That too.
So I love Wisconsin. I've met a lot of people from Wisconsin. My PhD advisor at University of Texas was from Wisconsin, and I love the Midwest. That's why I shouted out. I think Wisconsin, as somebody who grew up in a country that I would not have replaced my childhood now that I am who I am. It was very educational, but I wish I actually just grew up in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So there you go.
The second part of the question, what is the most geopolitically mundane place you can think of? I don't know that I have a good one off the top of my head, but I just want to say two things. First is, Saudi Arabia would have been the most geopolitically mundane place you could have thought of before they discovered oil, and then it became one of the most important places in the world. So advances in technology or the way that resources are used can turn these things.
I don't know about that though. Like Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam and conquered like half the world. So
yes, like in the 700s and 800s.
Well, I mean,
in
you gotta
the 1800s, it was a backwater. Some guys went to the Kaaba
time
for a
and
while.
place. Excuse me, this is 3-dimensional podcast, right? 4th-dimensional time and place.
Dimension. I'm just saying, the discovery of oil put them on the map.
No, but it's a great question. It's such a great question.
It is.
In 2026,
and I already alluded to my answer, by the way. For I have a soft spot for Tunisia, which had a little brief moment in the sun because it was the birthplace of the Arab Spring. And what would have to happen for it to become a top 5 country in geopolitics again would be the Neo-Carthaginian Empire would have to rise, and a new Hannibal would come, and he'd be marching those elephants right across right to Rome. We're gonna run it back, baby. Let's see what happens when the Carthaginians get to roll it back. That would be my call.
I'll give you a different example, although it's increasingly becoming it thinks of itself as increasingly a hotspot. But listen, there's a reason that tech bro billionaires have bunkers in this country. Now, there's people from New Zealand listening to this. They're going to be insulted. But listen, this is not a negative. Okay? If you take this as an insult, you lost the plot, my friends. you want to be the geopolitical backwater, and I think New Zealand is it. I just think it's such a safe place. And yes, like there's some China threat to New Zealand. Listen, buddy, if we're at a point where China's invaded New Zealand, like I mean, like Jacob and I are, you know what I mean? Like we're reading their little red book. So listen, Peter Thiel is a very intelligent man. You may not like him, but he's a very intelligent man. There's a reason he got a bunker in New Zealand long before anyone else. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, thank you, listeners, for sending in your questions, and we will do this again. This was fun, Mark.
Let me just say also, thank you guys all. It's so amazing to have enough content for a mailbag, right? So thank you guys. I mean, thank you for being listeners, and thank you for putting up with both of our hyperbole, TDSDSs, and all sorts of other things.
All right. Cheers, y'all.